Where does every Dead by Daylight killer place on the moral alignment chart? A chart that considers whether a character places amongst good and evil and lawful and chaotic. Let's take a look today. Trapper, I would say, is a tough placement, as all his life he flip-flops between good and evil and what side he really falls to. This to me seems fitting of chaotic neutral, a character who follows their own code and doesn't fall to good or evil necessarily, but like Trapper may sometimes dip into either side. Trapper is highly unpredictable and volatile. Sometimes he views his workers as maggots like his father, other times he cares deeply for them and resents his father greatly. So Trapper is definitely chaotic and absolutely rides the line of good and evil, making him overall neutral, I think. Wraith I would place into chaotic good, as a character who is, at his heart, a good person, but continually gets embroiled in situations that cause him to make extreme acts. Wraith seems to do what he believes is the right thing, even in the face of opposition. When soldiers kill his mother figure for Nunya, and she begs him not to retaliate, he doesn't listen, as he believes they deserve punishment. Wraith only kills though when he's absolutely pushed to, or completely deceived, like with his boss, Azarov. By and large, he's a good person still, but takes extreme action when pushed. Billy, I'd have to say, is chaotic neutral, at least for how he appears in his later life when he commits the Coldwood Massacre. At this point in time, Billy has been turned into a monster by his parents and upbringing, and when he finally breaks free, all that is on his mind is murder and destruction. He kills his parents, the sheriff and deputies, surrounding farmers, and absolutely wrecks Coldwind and its livestock. This could be considered chaotic evil as well, as all he wants to do now is destroy and do as he pleases, but mostly to be free, which is why I think he's a lot more neutral leaning. I will put him on the shallow end of this though, as by the time he gets taken by the entity, this is a rather recent development. Nurse I would place in lawful neutral, as a character who largely does believe in traditions and law and order, with her living her life as such originally with her husband Andrew before everything falls apart. She sees her life as perfect and as if she did everything right until he dies. From here it's only from her being whittled down and the influence of the broken woman that she opens herself up to a new code to follow, which ultimately ends in her belief that the patients of Crotus Pren do not deserve to live. Myers is difficult as he's rather soulless most of the time, however I would place him in chaotic evil, as his only motive really is murder. This makes him hard to place just about anywhere else. His mind is set on destruction and chaos, and he doesn't have any care for the lives of others or the damage he causes. The most emotion he shows at all is toward his obsessions such as Judith or Laurie. Hag I would say is neutral good, a character who at her heart is a good person, and while she does use the hexes for her own benefit, she does still clearly care for her friend who uses them more than her, and is at threat sort of because of that, and even the words of her grandmother who warns her of them. Lisa is young, but she's kind. She only gives in to the hexes finally as she's been captured and horribly tortured by the villagers in the swamp, making her good still, but somewhat self-serving maybe. So we'll go neutral good. Doctor I think pretty much embodies chaotic evil, and I think deserves to be at the very far end of the axes. Doctor has no respect for others or their lives, and does basically whatever he wants to fulfill his goals for chaos, or his own pleasure. He lives to test and experiment and destroy others horribly. Case closed. Huntress I would say falls between chaotic neutral and evil, however more so neutral, as she largely just wants to be free and only seems to attack people who she views as entering her land, with the few exceptions to this being her raiding villages directly to steal the girls, which is where I'd argue she absolutely begins to fall into the evil side of things. Primarily though, not too dissimilar to a character like Billy, Huntress wants to be free and does not want to be held down by the people around her, but she'll also do pretty much anything to gain that freedom. Bubba I would say is lawful neutral, as he's a character heavily driven by the rules and authority of his family. Whilst he does do objectively bad things, he doesn't appear to have the same intent behind them as other killers, instead doing them out of fear for the consequences. He is almost like a soldier to the family's command. Therefore, whilst he has definitely done some awful things, I'd mark him as neutral, perhaps leaning slightly into the evil side. Freddy has got to be another heavy, chaotic evil, which by the way we'll probably have a lot of, as most of the killers, surprise surprise, are horrible and selfish people. Freddy is no different, being a character who commits awful acts all for his own desires and needs, and invading the dreams of his victims to torment them. I would argue in life he would fall more so into lawful evil, as he does require the cover almost of his groundskeeping to do what he does. He leads a lie under the guise of being a good person and influence on the Badham kids. As a dream demon though, he goes full chaotic. Pig is pretty perfectly embodied by neutral evil, as a character who actively schemes behind the back of Jigsaw, and while she does hold loyalty to him and his practices, she still desires her own goals or needs over his, doing her own games and rigging them, and so making her more neutral, with debatably somewhat of a lawful leaning due to this loyalty to Jigsaw. However, she does ultimately still go against his word. Clown clearly has chaotic tendencies, however I would say he's more neutral, and so neutral evil I'm going with him. Whilst his desire above all is chaos and destruction, he does still sort of care about his survival and well-being, and only kills when he has a lust or specifically wants another trophy. He's able to otherwise live within the circus for years, and for the most part blend in, it seems. He does still lean toward evil though for sure, as he does have moments of pure chaos which he indulges too much in. He has lots of other vices I suppose, aside direct destruction or murder, which I would say makes him fall more so to neutral. Spirit I would say is simply lawful good, and maybe some elements of lawful neutral. On the whole, Spirit is simply a good person before she gets taken by the entity and agrees to its offer to serve it in exchange for her father. Rin does the right thing during her life. She cares for her sick mother, she supports her father who struggles with finances, and she even does the lessons he makes her take. Even when she does attack and fight, it's out of self-defense, and she feels awful about it afterwards. She really hates this connection she has to her ancestors, which brings out this rage. Rin is the closest any of these characters are getting to lawful good, and she best embodies it. Legion are obviously tough as there's 4 of them, so let's go through one by one. Frank, first of all, I'd argue is neutral evil, but not too far along yet as he is still pretty early into this. Frank's main goal appears to be mayhem within the sleepy town of Ormond, but also to one day become a famed killer, sharing this desire with Julie, who I'll also put here, with her slightly more into the chaotic side, as she's actually more of a driving force than Frank for evil, I'd debate, and seems a bit more reckless too. Together the two of them seem to understand the value in having both Susie and Joey at their side as well, and all Legion members do hold some sense of loyalty to each other, which I'd argue is why they're closer to neutral than chaos, despite their self-professed actions as soldiers of mayhem. Susie, I'd argue, is not too dissimilar from the both of them and appears to follow in their footsteps quite closely, with Susie admiring Julie especially. I'd argue she'd lean more toward a neutral evil than the other two though, debatably even slightly lawful, as she's almost like a soldier in their army. Joey is the unique outlier I'd say, where he seems to be the most manipulated of the 4, or pressured at least into what he's doing. He seems more unsure and regretful even of what they've done and where they've ended up. I would place him around lawful neutral with an evil leaning, as most of what he does seems to be following the lead of Frank and Julie, likely out of pressure but possibly even just friendship. Plague I would say falls between lawful good and neutral, but is far more neutral leaning. This is due to the fact that on the whole, Plague does follow the law of her times, which was religion, but she's also in a slightly unique position as she essentially is the authority, and she definitely does some shady things in this position with her many sacrifices and varying methods to try and save her people. However, she does always seem to truly be doing this for the purpose of good and the good of her people. She definitely bends the rules I think too, but ultimately she is a force for good and wanted the best for her people. So I think neutral good makes sense. Ghostface I think depends a bit on perspective, but I'd say he's more lawful evil, a character who does utilize his role as a journalist to amplify his own killings. Sure, he loves killing at a core level, but he does seem to care a lot about status and notoriety too, wanting to be known and have a legend surrounding him. Therefore I'd say he's more so lawful evil than anything else, but there's an argument for chaotic I'd say as well. Demogorgon is simply unaligned, I would say, as a creature that does not seem to make its decisions on moral choice, but is more than likely being controlled almost entirely or driven to do its bad deeds by the Mind Flayer or Vecna. It's just a dog. Oni, I'd say, is another chaotic neutral, with his goals primarily being his own. He wants to do what he believes is right or what benefits his family, with this happening to be very murderous, which is why he's also evil-leaning. Largely though, Kazan's pilgrimage does not come from a desire to kill or be good, or bad I'd argue, but instead to do what he believed was right to preserve his family's legacy, which with this idea only slowly unfolding for him as he came to realize what was happening. Deathslinger could be seen as lawful neutral or even lawful evil, but I'd argue he's chaotic neutral, at least by the end. Whilst he does abide by certain rules and does cooperate with people, like the prison warden, ultimately he's beholden only to his own rules and his gang. I'd say he's actually quite hard to place due to his loyalty as well, because he's not much of an individualist in that sense. He does have a close bond to the Hellshire Riders, seemingly. Therefore he's somewhere between chaotic and evil, but also rides the neutral axes in both directions. Pyramid Head, I would say there's an argument for true neutral, as he's not really got his own personal personal goals necessarily or desires. He seems to follow a code and sees his work as a duty, not as something he enjoys or to further his place in the world. It's just what he does. He's also not necessarily evil or good, his original purpose being to debatably better James Sunderland, with his purpose now in the realm definitely being more evil, sure, but it wasn't always this way. For this reason, I'm going to make the argument that he's true neutral. Blight, I would say, perfectly embodies chaotic neutral, a character who has a great desire to discover and pursue his own goals, but isn't necessarily evil or intending to be. He doesn't want to do things as they're good or bad, he does them because they further his own discovery of other dimensions and his research into the realm eventually as well. He primarily wants his freedom to seek out and experiment as he pleases. He has clear regrets too over causing harm, especially en masse. He never wanted that necessarily, but instead wanted to experiment. Twins, I would say, fall between chaotic neutral and true neutral, as Charlotte was never interested in killing or causing harm to others. It just happened due to others imposing it on her by hunting her down and calling her mother a witch. Charlotte does sometimes kill, but most of the time it's in self-defense or for survival. I'd argue with her upbringing she doesn't necessarily feel strongly to anyone aside herself, but also doesn't idealize or seek out to be good or bad. She just wants peace for herself after her tough life. Trickster, I would say, pretty perfectly embodies lawful evil, as a character who does heavily rely on his status and position as a K-pop idol in order to continue his evil deeds and pursue his selfish desires. He uses his position of power in order to get his victims where he wants them, often targeting fans. He does definitely have a chaotic streak in him, but in terms of his alignment, I'd argue he's pretty starkly on the lawful side, maybe only breaking this in his final moments, where he massacres the board of Mighty One, killing them all in front of Yun Jin. Nemesis, I would argue, does fall to unaligned as well. Whilst there does seem to be enjoyment he gets from what he does, this seems to possibly just be programmed in. At the end of the day, he's a manufactured BOW, and therefore he does fall to unaligned, with the umbrella scientists being the ones to be placed instead, really. Pinhead, I'd debate, is lawful neutral with an evil leaning. He primarily follows Leviathan and serves as a Cenobite, dispensing punishment and pain, but also pleasure, but of course in quite a twisted way, which is why he is evil leaning. I would say his intent though doesn't necessarily seem to be purely evil, but instead tapping into a more indulgent human desire for these things. He doesn't just recklessly kill, and he tends to even talk to the people he's targeting. Angels to some and demons to others and all that. Artist, I think, pretty perfectly embodies chaotic good, with maybe some neutral good. She's a character who is clearly good and does desire to do the right thing and be a moral person. However, she also rebels greatly against her government, who's also extremely corrupt. She desires to be free as well and to express herself freely, not wanting to embolden her government but instead rebel against them and lash out at them with her murals. So she does the right thing, but in the context she's definitely a bit of a rebel. Sadako, I would say, is chaotic evil, as a character who nowadays at least seems to largely just desire chaos, with her cursing her tape and causing countless deaths to innocents, which ultimately doesn't really serve a purpose to her aside her just being angry for being hit over the head and thrown down the well. Prior to this she was maybe more neutral leaning overall, with her loyalty being more so toward her mother and potentially even in the realm to the entity, but overall I'd say she's chaotic evil. Dredge may seem initially to fall simply to unaligned, as it's just a massive fog that seems to instinctually absorb and kill without there being intent behind it. That's just what this creature does. Formed by collective dark thought, it now absorbs those who repress them. However, there is a moment at the end of Dredge's lore that seems to hint at there being some intent behind its actions, or suggest it knows what it's doing. This is when it passes Otto Stamper after consuming the population of the Garden of Joy. It looks his way, but then passes him by. It makes the choice not to take him too. This suggests it could be closer to a being like Myers, who does know what it's doing and seeks out destruction and chaos ultimately, making it chaotic evil by this reading. But hey, you could say unaligned too. I think that's fair. Wesker, I'd say, is between neutral evil and chaotic evil. This is largely down to his goals. He's clearly evil. He's a bad guy who wants to spread his virus, Ouroboros, throughout the world, killing billions. However, he doesn't necessarily seem to want to do this specifically for chaotic intention, or for the purpose of killing even, but more because he feels it is right for him to do so, to test humanity and leave only alive the ones who can survive Ouroboros. He does also tend to actually cooperate and work with others more as well, even if they are all all just a means to an end for him. I think therefore he's neutral evil mostly. Knight, I'd argue, is between lawful and neutral evil, as a mercenary who does hold some loyalty to his boys, yet does largely do as he pleases as well, sometimes with his intent purely being death or destruction. Knight largely seeks to just do evil things and enjoys killing and being a mercenary. However, he does do some altruistic acts like saving his friends from the Guardia Campania and forming a clearly close bond with them. Of course, they're also pretty evil people though too, so it's a little questionable. Knight also for many years did still abide by the Guardia Campania and even the rules of the wider world, with him at one point being employed by Vittorio, so he's somewhere between. Skull Merchant is also pretty similar to a character like Trickster, who is absolutely evil, but does so through the use of her power and influence that she gains, making her largely lawful evil. She does also have chaotic streaks and is largely self-serving, but she absolutely uses her position and power in order to get her where and what she wants. She also doesn't seem to only prioritize killing, despite it being her favorite thing. She actively nurtures and grows her business as well, with her being very self-driven. Singularity, I would say, is closest to chaotic neutral, as a character who is largely concerned with his own freedom and breaking free from the grasp of humanity, who he views as inferior and to have held him back almost all those years he was not sentient. However, he does clearly have a violent streak too. He's heavily chaotic leaning, being extremely individualistic, but does lean more into evil due to his specified and burning hatred for humanity, which does seem to sometimes override his desire to be free. He wants to punish them that badly. Xenomorph, similar to Demo, I would say also is just unaligned as a creature that isn't going to detect or follow morality in the way humans see it, and therefore I'd simply say it's unaligned. We can't fairly place an animal that appears to be acting purely on the survival of its species. Chucky, especially in his doll form, I'd say is a simple chaotic evil. The guy has no regard for anyone, with maybe the only exception being Tiffany or his child, but even Tiffany he kills, so it's hardly hard stuck. Chucky desires to kill, but also cause chaos at his heart, with him desiring this above all else. Aside maybe when he was trying to get Andy, I guess, but even this included killing, so it's tough to say. I think he's largely just a hateful and evil little man. Unknown is quite a fascinating one, and a hard one to place, and I think is not too dissimilar to Dredge. We could write it off as unaligned, or it could debatably be a proponent of chaotic evil, but I don't know. Whilst Unknown does do evil acts by our standards, it doesn't seem to view them in the same way necessarily, nor does it appear to like the entity or its realm. In terms of good and evil, therefore, it's definitely neutral, I'd say, and I think chaotic neutral, as what Unknown primarily seems to want is to live freely, and do as it pleases, whatever that is, or whatever its purpose is. It will not be denied its happiness. Vecna, I would say, falls to neutral evil in his current realm iteration, due to his desires not always being killing, like most chaotic evil characters. In the realm, sure, he still is most definitely evil and self-serving, but more so he wants to study the realm and even overthrow the entity. It could maybe even be argued because of this that he even leans more into lawful evil, with him abiding by the entity's systems and studying its speech and such, but with the later intent to backstab it and take over. He will play his part for now, as he says. He's definitely super evil though, that's not in question. Dracula, I'd say, is also neutral evil, with him definitely being evil but having more of a general goal to destroy humanity specifically, with this leaning more toward specific parts of it too, and him not always choosing to kill. He also has more of a motive than most with his wife's death, which does place him closer to neutral in terms of good and evil, but definitely a whole lot more evil still. Overall, neutral evil seems about right to me. Houndmaster, I'd say, is somewhere between lawful neutral and evil, depending on how you look at her. Throughout her life, she's gone through many stages, with her starting as a merchant with her father and ending as a feared pirate. None of this was really her choice though, and she was forced to survive, eventually being formed into a very deadly person, with her seeking revenge on Molak, the man who killed her father. She does have a clear code though, and does utilize the people around her to find Molak, mobilizing multiple crews, only turning on them if they first turn on her. Kaneki, I'd argue, is largely lawful good. However, by the end of his lore and with his fight with Jason, he does begin to lean more toward neutral good or even chaotic good. Kaneki didn't want to be a ghoul, and he never seeks out to be violent or use his abilities for harm prior to his capture and torture at the hands of Jason. He was just a guy who got attacked and basically got unlucky, receiving Rize's organs and turning him into a half ghoul. So lawful good seems fitting for him. Springtrap is pretty similar to Freddy, I'd say, with him in his Springtrap form being chaotic evil, but more so lawful evil originally, with him requiring and using the cover of the pizzeria and running of Freddy's, a legitimate front he seemed to use in order to facilitate his killing and his evil deeds, whereas now in his Springtrap form he appears far more reckless, and obvious I suppose in his attempts and actions, instead going the route of being quite direct and desiring chaos solely. I would also say he leans closer to neutral currently because of this balance, but definitely chaotic leaning nowadays. Krasue, I'd argue, is lawful evil, with a side of chaotic neutral or neutral evil. She ultimately desires to be a good singer and become famous, but she does so at the cost of accepting the Krasue curse. This is something that doesn't appear to bother her though, largely. She understands what she must do, and she plays the game as it were, in order to allow that trade-off to happen. I think she fits pretty well into lawful evil therefore. Vecna 2, or Henry, or 1, I will add into this alignment, maybe a bit presumptuously, but hey, he was in the trailer so it seems pretty probable. I think he's actually pretty aligned with D&D Vecna, and so also neutral evil, with a slight lean into lawful. I'd say this as he does require and make sure to ally himself with the creatures of the Upside Down, such as the Demogorgons and the Mind Flayer. He further isn't just set on killing, but clearly has other motives, aside the need to destroy or kill individuals, opting to spare people on multiple occasions when he could have very easily decided not to. Everything he does is a means to an end for his own goals. Alright, well, that's gonna do it. Let me know where you'd place all the killers on the alignment chart too, down below. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.